In June of 1993, a quiet neighborhood in Minneapolis, Minnesota became the scene of a crime so brutal and confusing that it haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. The victim was Jeannie Ann Childs, a 35-year-old woman living alone in a small apartment on 27th Avenue South, near Minnehaha Creek. She had no known enemies, no history of violence, and no obvious reason to be targeted. What police found inside her apartment shocked even experienced detectives. The case went cold for 29 years, until one name, long forgotten, finally surfaced again. This is the story of Jeannie Childs, who killed her, and why it took nearly 30 years to uncover the truth. Jeannie Ann Childs was born in 1957 and grew up in Minnesota. By 1993, she was 35 years old and living a quiet, independent life in Minneapolis. Friends and family described her as intelligent, private, and soft-spoken. She worked various jobs over the years and was known to keep mostly to herself. Jeannie wasn't involved in drugs, gangs, or dangerous relationships. She lived in a modest apartment building at 401 East 27th Street, a typical residential area. Nothing about her lifestyle suggested she was in danger. That's what made what happened next so disturbing. On June 13, 1993, Jeannie's father went to check on her after not hearing from her for several days. When he arrived at her apartment, something immediately felt wrong. Jeannie's door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was silent. As he walked further in, he made a horrifying discovery. Jeannie Childs was lying on the floor of her bedroom. She was dead. Police arrived quickly, and what they found left them stunned. Jeannie had been stabbed more than 60 times. The wounds were concentrated around her chest, neck, and upper body, suggesting extreme rage. Even more disturbing, the murder weapon, a broken knife blade, was still embedded in her chest. The handle had snapped off during the attack. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No damis lux. This suggested that Jeannie knew her killer, or at least trusted them enough to let them inside. Despite the brutality, the apartment was not ransacked. Nothing valuable appeared to be stolen. This was not a robbery. This was personal. Minneapolis police immediately launched a full investigation. They interviewed neighbors, family members, co-workers, and anyone who had contact with Jeannie in the days before her death. Several facts stood out. Jeannie lived alone. She had no current romantic partner. She had no history of domestic violence. She was last seen alive a few days earlier. There were no witnesses who saw anyone suspicious entering or leaving her apartment. No justifiable fingerprints. No security cameras. This was 1993. The only potential evidence was DNA, recovered from under Jeannie's fingernails and from blood at the scene. But in 1993, DNA technology was limited. The DNA profile did not match anyone in law enforcement databases at the time. With no suspect and no leads, the case slowly went cold. Over the years, detectives periodically reviewed the case. The sheer violence of the murder suggested intense anger, possibly rejection, jealousy, or a perceived betrayal. Investigators believed the killer was likely a man, someone Jeannie knew, someone who felt personally wronged. But belief is not proof. And without DNA matches or witnesses, the case remained unsolved. For Jeannie's family, the pain never faded. For detectives, the case became one that lingered in the back of their minds, a reminder of unfinished justice. By the late 2010s, DNA science had changed dramatically. Cold cases across the United States were being solved using genetic genealogy, a technique that allows investigators to identify suspects through family DNA connections. In 2021, Minneapolis police decided to take another look at the DNA from Jeannie Childs' murder. The evidence was sent for advanced testing. This time, something changed. The DNA profile produced a lead. Not a name at first, but a family line. And slowly, that family tree narrowed, until one name stood out. The DNA led investigators to James Gary Deloska. Deloska was not a stranger. He was someone Jeannie Childs had known. In fact, he had been romantically interested in her years earlier. Records showed that Deloska and Jeannie had crossed paths in the late 1980s. Jeannie had rejected him. Friends later confirmed that Deloska had become obsessed, angry, and resentful. But by 1993, Deloska had moved on, or so it seemed. In reality, the anger never left. James Gary Deloska was born in 1953. He had a history of violence against women, including sexual assault. He was known to harbor grudges and had difficulty accepting rejection. By the time police identified him in 2021, Deloska was already dead. He had died in 2012. At first, investigators worried they would never be able to officially close the case. But the DNA told a clear story. The DNA recovered from under Jeannie Childs' fingernails matched Deloska's genetic profile through family comparisons. There was no doubt. He was the killer. Investigators believe the motive was rejection and rage. Jeannie Childs had made it clear she was not interested in a relationship with Deloska. For most people, rejection hurts, but they move on. For Deloska, it became an obsession. Detectives believe that on the night of the murder, Deloska went to Jeannie's apartment, possibly under the pretense of talking or reconnecting. She let him in. At some point, an argument began. Jeannie likely tried to defend herself. That's when Deloska snapped. The sheer number of stab wounds indicates overkill, a classic sign of personal rage rather than planned murder. This was not about money. This was not random. This was about control, rejection, and a man who could not accept no. The reason this case took nearly 3 decades to solve comes down to one thing: timing. In 1993, DNA databases were small. Genetic genealogy didn't exist. Deloska was not in Cody's. There was no way to link him to the crime. Only when technology advanced did the truth finally emerge. In 2022, Minneapolis police officially announced that James Gary Deloska was responsible for the murder of Jeannie Childs. The case was closed. Some may ask, does it matter if the killer is already dead? For Jeannie's family, the answer is yes. They finally had a name, an explanation, the truth. Jeannie Childs was not forgotten. Her case did not disappear into a file cabinet. It waited, and eventually, science spoke when silence could not. The murder of Jeannie Childs reminds us that some crimes leave scars that time cannot erase. But it also reminds us that justice does not always move quickly. Sometimes it waits for better tools, waits for truth to surface, waits for someone to finally listen. Nearly 30 years later, Jeannie Childs finally got her answer, and her killer was finally named. If you found this story compelling, like the video and subscribe to Truth Trove Stories for more deep dives into solved and cold cases from around the world. Leave a comment below. Do you think cases like this prove that no crime is ever truly forgotten? Thanks for watching Truth Trove Stories, where the hidden truth always comes to light.